There is a quiet moment that repeats itself in almost every financial life, and it rarely feels important when it happens, because it arrives wrapped in a harmless thought, a soft internal justification that says this will not matter, that this is only happening once, and that everything will return to normal immediately after. And yet, if you observe closely, this single thought appears again and again across time, attaching itself to different purchases, different situations, different moods, slowly forming a pattern that is far more consistent than it seems in the moment. What makes this pattern difficult to notice is not its size, but its familiarity, because each decision feels small, controlled, and temporary, even as the accumulation of these decisions begins to quietly shape long-term outcomes. The core concept behind this behavior is not a lack of discipline or awareness, but a structural feature of how the mind processes exceptions, because the phrase, just this once, creates a mental boundary that isolates the present action from future consequences, allowing the decision to bypass the systems that would normally regulate behavior. In other words, the brain treats the moment as separate from the larger pattern, even though in reality it is part of it. And the separation reduces resistance, making the action feel easier and more acceptable than it would otherwise be. Over time, this creates a subtle shift in baseline behavior, because what begins as an exception slowly becomes normalized, not through conscious intention, but through repetition. The mind adapts to patterns, and when exceptions occur frequently enough, they stop feeling like exceptions at all, which means the original standard quietly erodes. A spending rule that once felt stable begins to loosen, not abruptly, but gradually, as each just this once moment adds a small amount of flexibility to the system until the system itself changes. To understand the long-term effect, it helps to view this pattern through a simple mathematical lens, because even small deviations from a consistent saving process can compound into significant differences over time. Imagine a scenario where a person sets aside a fixed portion of their income regularly, creating a steady upward trajectory in their savings, and then introduces occasional exceptions where small amounts are diverted toward immediate use. Individually, these amounts appear negligible, but when they occur repeatedly, they reduce the overall rate of accumulation, flattening the growth curve in a way that is not immediately visible, but becomes increasingly significant as time passes. This is where the distortion becomes most apparent, because the person continues to feel as though they are following their system, even as the system itself has been quietly altered. The intention remains intact, but the execution has shifted, and the gap between the two begins to widen. What could have been a smooth, continuous progression turns into a pattern of partial resets, where progress is made and then slightly undone, over and over again, creating the impression that forward movement is happening without the corresponding long-term results. From a broader perspective, this behavior aligns closely with the structure of modern economic environments, where constant opportunities for small, low-friction spending decisions make it easy for these exceptions to occur. The system does not need to encourage large, dramatic expenditures. It operates efficiently through small, repeated actions that feel insignificant in isolation, but become powerful in aggregate. When many individuals operate within this pattern, it reinforces a cycle where money flows continuously outward rather than accumulating over time. There is also an identity component embedded within this process, because financial behavior is closely tied to how individuals perceive themselves in relation to control and consistency. When exceptions become frequent, they begin to influence self-perception, subtly reinforcing the idea that maintaining strict consistency is difficult or unnecessary. This does not happen consciously, but it shapes future decisions by lowering the threshold for what feels acceptable, making each new exception slightly easier than the last. Breaking this pattern does not require eliminating flexibility or avoiding all small expenditures, but it does involve recognizing that the phrase "just this once" is rarely isolated, and that its impact is not determined by the size of the individual decision, but by the frequency with which it occurs. By bringing awareness to this repetition, it becomes possible to reintroduce a sense of continuity between present actions and future outcomes, allowing decisions to be evaluated as part of a larger pattern rather than as standalone events. In a more analytical sense, the goal is to maintain alignment between intention and behavior over extended periods of time. Because consistency, even at a modest level, tends to produce more stable outcomes than irregular bursts of discipline followed by repeated exceptions. This does not mean eliminating all variation, but rather reducing the gap between what is planned and what is executed so that the overall trajectory remains intact. When viewed from a distance, the just this once spending trap is not defined by any single decision, but by the accumulation of many small permissions that gradually reshape behavior. And the key insight is that patterns are built not through large events, but through repeated moments that feel too small to matter. Once those moments are recognized as part of a continuous system rather than isolated exceptions, the pattern becomes visible. And once it is visible, it can be adjusted, not through force, but through steady, consistent alignment between choice and direction over time. If you found this insight helpful, please subscribe for more.